you so much for joining me today. And I wanted to have a chat with you about Ability Academy and, everything that, you stand for in the industry. And I just saw a thing on LinkedIn that you're nominated for an Entrepreneurship Award.
Yeah, basically, there's a big an awards ceremony in London every year, and we've been nominated for the creative part of that entrepreneurship. And yeah, so like it's good to be recognised, to tell you the truth. So yeah.
I bet. And from what I understand, it's been a long time coming. um, how long ago did you create your academy?
So I started it about 4 years ago, and at that time, it was still quite hard to persuade people that diversity and inclusion was important in terms of the film and TV industry.
Yes.
And I really struggled to get funding because I knew that my company, I wanted to make a social enterprise. So a lot of people with business experience didn't really understand what a social enterprise was. They kept saying it was a non-for-profit, and I was trying to explain that I take a salary and then I reinvest the money back into the academy. And no one seemed to get it at all, sort of thing. And I was just fortunate that I got connected with a company called Firstport and Unlimited, and they actually was doing a project with Scope to basically make the industry more inclusive. So actually what I was doing was fitting quite well with their criteria, and we managed to get some funding from Unlimited, and then we managed to get some funding from Firstport as well, which was great. So it's just grown from there, and from starting from nothing, we've done really well. So we're now training for BBC Accelerator Scheme, BBC Natural History Unit. I'm going down to teach for ITV Coronation Street and Emmerdale. I'm teaching a Avid course for them. We've done some stuff for Netflix, for Grierson Trust, for Mama Youth in London. So we've really like grown over the last 4 years. But when I started, I was just about to give it in because I was just getting nowhere, and there was very little support from the industry. And now people are coming to me. So rather than me knocking on doors, I'm being knocked on my door, which is quite nice to be in the
Yeah,
situation.
absolutely. Why was it important to you that it was a social enterprise?
The reason was I don't want, if anything happened to the company, I wanted to make sure that any assets the company owned was locked into the company, or that if it didn't, it actually went to a similar social enterprise, so that the money didn't then, or the assets didn't then go to someone that I didn't feel that it was right to do. So the reason I set this up is I have an invisible disability myself, and I was told from a young age that because of my disability, I wouldn't work as a film editor. And then I was quite fortunate because I've done films all around the world, to like Aberdeen, Cannes, Rain Dance, Edinburgh International. And so when I set the academy up, it was in the thinking that I wanted to help other people that also may have visible and invisible disability to get into the film and TV industry in terms of post-production, because now it's becoming much more accessible. When I started, you kind of had to be in a post house, and a lot of these post houses, especially if you had a physical disability, were very inaccessible. A lot of them were in basements or had stairs. But what has become, because of the pandemic, is that a lot of people now can work remotely, so they can edit pretty much anywhere now, sort of thing, which has really helped the industry. Because my last editing job, I was in Scotland, the producer and director were in London, and the edit suite that I was controlling was in Brighton. So it shows you how this technology's changed the industry. So yeah.
Absolutely. And in the last 4 years, do you feel like there was a sort of turning point in sort of people, sort of perception of what you do, and what would you say it was?
I think the reason is that broadcasters have now realized that inclusion and diversity is so much part of their makeup, and the fact now that they've got diversity targets that they've got to hit. So they're saying where do we get these people from? And I'm saying, well, if we train people, we have the people that we need, sort of thing. So in a way, I'm helping the broadcasters by training people with the right skills. Unfortunately, what happens with a lot of universities is they train people in certain software, and then they go into the industry, and the industry is like, this isn't what we want. This is not the software we want people to have. So they do a 3 or 4 year degree, and then unfortunately they start as runners because they don't have the skills or the right skills that the broadcasters want. So what we're doing is actually providing the right editing skills so that people then go in as assistants and junior editors.
Yeah, that's something that we talked about, didn't we? Because I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm a lecturer up here in Scotland, and that's exactly what we do. I think most film schools and training bodies are. I'm not sure why. Is it cheaper? Is it easier? I'm not sure why, but we train in Final Cut or Premiere, and I think Avid asks a lot of server power, which for a college is difficult to handle, maybe. But I totally agree that we need to get. Do you think Avid is here to stay? Do you think is the
I don't know. Like, at the end of the day, I've been using it for a long time. I've been using it since 1996. But what's changed in terms of Avid and Premiere is that now you can buy a license and you can pay monthly, whereas before you had to pay out a big fee for the software. Well, it was hardware, but now it's mainly software, and that put a lot of people off. And what's great now is if you're now a college or university, Avid are basically giving the software free to students, so it's becoming much more accessible. The only thing is, if you want to do the exams, you still got to work with an Avid learning partner to do the actual exams to get accredited. But I think as long as you get the right skills, that's half the battle. And not only that, it's skills like communication, it's skills like working as a team, because even though editing's can be quite a lonely job, you still have to work with directors, you still have to work with executive producers, so you still have to work with these different people. So communication is one of the key skills, I think, when it comes to editing, and being able to take people's opinions and not get too too bogged down off your own edit, because unfortunately at the end of the day it's a director who makes a film and you're editing their film. So if you get too worried about, oh, they're going to ruin the film, at the end of the day it's the director and the producer who are actually paying the money. So that's why you'll find a lot of the times on big features you'll get an editor's cut and you'll get a director's cut, because the director spent all day to get in one shot and then the editor just cut it out because it doesn't really add to the story. But because they spent all the time trying to get this one shot, they still want it in their film. So a lot of the times what you used to get, we still get sometimes now, is you'll get two different cuts. You'll get an editor's cut and the director, and the editor will just keep the story in, and the director will get these funny shots that they wanted in, but don't really have much reason to be there. But that's just my opinion.
the rule 101, kill your darlings. And is that something that you teach within the academy? Is that something, communication, and do you teach like sort of to try to impart the soft skills as well as Avid and
Yeah, what we try and do is we teach quite technical courses, but we're developing more storytelling courses as well. So what's good to do is be able to operate the software, but also to have an understanding of how story structure work and how like the 3-act structure works, and that, yeah, there's this 3-act structure, but you can break it, but you need to know about it before you can break it. It's like a lot of rules in editing. There's rules there, but things like jump cuts and things like different techniques, L cuts and J cuts, you kind of need to know about them before you can break them, sort of thing, or experiment with them, because the whole point of editing should be a creative process. It should be finding out different ways of creating. And what the great thing is about non-linear editing is the fact that you can try out different cuts, you can try different versions, and then decide between you which you feel is the best one.
Mm. And you're based in Scotland, correct? And
Yeah.
how did you see the sort of industry evolve in the last few years, and how do you feel it's going?
Well, what's changed is when I first moved to Scotland over, well, it must be nearly 20 years ago, a lot of my students back then, because before I did set up the academy, I worked at colleges like Fife College and Edinburgh College, and a lot of them were saying, "Oh, we've got to move to London to get work," and at that time, that was kind of the case, that a lot of work was still very much centered in London. But what's changed over the last 5 to 10 years is that a lot of work is now moved outside into the regions. So places like Glasgow, people like Salford, Cardiff, all these different regions. And what a lot of producers are finding is that they now get budgets to work with people outside of London now. So they're actually wanting to work with people outside. And so the opportunities are now there. And a lot of programs and Netflix and Amazon and big Hollywood productions are now coming to Scotland. The problem for a long time is that we didn't have a film studio. So the main issue was that a lot of the times they would shoot their locations in Scotland, but then do all the post-production and do all this sound work in London because there wasn't the facilities here. But now they're trying to work on that, and they're trying to get studios up and running, and they're trying to get post facilities in Scotland. And I think the more that we can do up here, the better, because there's no reason that you have to move down to London, because if you've got the talent in Scotland, why not use them? The problem is that a lot of the times producers use the same people, so they are quite used to using the same people over and again. And what I tried to say is, why not try out new people? Because if we don't give them the opportunities, the industry is not going to change. And what we're going to be doing is making the same film and TV programs again and again, and we're not going to get that diversity. We're not going to get these new voices in. And I think that's very important for the industry to grow, basically.
Absolutely. On that, I think we're really aligned, Nigel. And also, do you see, I want to address that point that you just mentioned about, using new people. And also, I guess I have a perception that on some level, American productions coming here still kind of use sort of the servicing aspect of the Scottish industry, not so much the talent, especially post-production.
Well,
Is that something?
yeah, the problem is there's this kind of assumption that we haven't got the talent here, that you have to be in London to be an editor, or you have to be in London to be a DOP. And I don't think that is the case anymore. I think there's very good, talented people all over the UK. And I don't think there's this kind of need now to have to move everything to London to do all your post work. If we can get better facilities, if we can persuade producers to work in Scotland, I think there's a real advantage of doing that, basically. And I think the more talent we can, homegrown talent we can grow in Scotland, I think the better. Because yeah, when I started, all the work was in London, but I think that now that you don't necessarily need to be in London, definitely in terms of television now, because there's so much being made in the regions. Like I say, in Cardiff and Bristol, you've got like Doctor Who, and you've got things like Casualty and all these productions happening. And then in Bristol, you've got the BBC Natural History Unit. And in Manchester now, in Salford, you've got a lot of productions that have actually moved from London, such as children's, such as entertainment departments, and now working in Salford. And there's a lot more happening in Glasgow now, and there's a lot more productions actually happening. So I think if we don't continue to train people, we're going to actually find that we're, in a few years' time, we're going to be in a situation where we actually haven't got enough crew, both production and post-production, to fill these roles, sort of thing. So, which I think is going to be terrible if that happens.
Absolutely. Do you have a handle on, with all the students that you train, where they end up, what's their first sort of kind of jobs or where they end up working?
Well, I'm quite fortunate is that I've monitored quite a lot of where a lot of my students have gone. And one of the courses I've just done with Screen Skills and the Pipeline, we know that at least 80% of them that did the course have actually got paid work at the end of it. So what's happened, the facility houses all around the UK was working with us to develop this course. So they're giving them the right skills that they need. So we developed a junior editor and an assistant editor's course. And those on the assistant editor, we know that 80% of them left that course and got paid work from the end of it, which is pretty amazing stats, really. And a lot of them said without the course, they wouldn't have had the skills and knowledge and abilities to be able to do that. So it shows that good training, industry focused training, is very important, because the problem is for a long time what's happened is a lot of colleges and universities have become separate entities, that they haven't talked to the film and TV industry, and they've been developing courses, but the industry doesn't want them courses. So it's silly, because we do a 3 or 4 year degree, we come out and we start as a runner. Like, we could have been 4 years up the ladder by now, sort of thing. So what we need to do is doing like what I'm doing with my academy, is talking to the industry, finding out what they need, and developing courses which the industry is actually wanting, and giving them people with the right skills and abilities to basically go in as a junior or as an assistant, rather than starting right at the bottom and having to spend 4 or 5 years just being where they would be if they'd gone straight in, sort of thing. And I'm not going to diss all the colleges, because there's a lot of colleges and universities that are doing that are talking to industry, but then there's a lot more that don't. And one of my great quotes was, one of my students said, "I learned more in a day with you about editing than in a 4-year media degree." So it just shows you that some of these universities are not providing the right training.
Mm. Um, and can you talk me through what Ability Academy means and the range of abilities and disabilities that you tackle and deal with?
Yeah. So the reason I set it up is because, like I say, I've got a disability. It used to be called manic depression. It's now called bipolar. And for a long time, it affected me, and it kind of, it was a barrier in a way for getting work. But now I don't mind if people know about it. Before, there was a big stigma about mental health, and it was quite a barrier. But now I think people are becoming more in tune to the fact that it's 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 will experience a mental health crisis in their lifetime. So it's very, very common. So it's called ability because we don't actually look at people's disability, we look at their ability. So for example, I've had students that have got autism. At the beginning of the course, they're literally looking at the floor, they're not really engaged. And by the end, they're just so engaged and they're so creative because they're doing something that they excel at. Unfortunately, sometimes in schools, what happens, especially if you've got certain disabilities, they sort of put you off to one side and think that you're not going to be academic or you're not going to be creative. But actually, what we've found is that some disabilities are actually an asset rather than not an asset to these people, because they see things slightly differently to other people. And actually, that is really good for film editing, because you've got to be creative and you've got to see outside the box. So we're actually finding that a lot of the students that we do teach have got skills outside of what they're doing. And sometimes if you have had a physical disability, you've had to overcome a lot of barriers in the past. So actually, this industry is not such a bad one to be in, because they're now trying to find out ways in terms of job sharing, in terms of looking at hours that people work. And so they've actually realized that both mental health and physical health is very important for the industry to flourish, basically. And there's charities now called the TV charity, which look at mental health, and they actually help support people if they're in crisis. And I actually used them when I wasn't very well, and they were great. They had a lot of resources, a lot of support, and it's all online, which is great. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. There's a couple of charities that have developed, and the film and TV charity are really, really good. Um, that's amazing. I love your piece about overcoming, and you know, if you've had some kind of challenge with physical or mental health, and you know, you're still here, then by nature you're overcoming something, and that's a skill in itself, which is very valuable to this industry. And especially, I love that we're having like this conversation just after Glastonbury and Luis Capaldi. I don't know if you saw, you know, the
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
that was huge.
Because the problem is with this industry for a long time is because a lot of people, well, I think it used to be 85% of the industry is freelance. You feel obliged to work for people, even though that you may be struggling. And I've changed my actual perception now, because for me, my physical and my mental health is the most important thing to me outside of my work. Whereas before I would put my work first. And when I was working in London, I would work stupid hours. I would work sometimes 16, 17-hour days. And that's not sustainable for very long, sort of thing. And because I was young and because I was freelance, I had this assumption that if I didn't do these stupid hours, that I wouldn't get any more work. I thought that I wasn't a good editor if I didn't have to. And I've realized now people are not that kind of, yeah, maybe that was different in the 90s, but now I think they've realized that you need to have a good work home balance, because if you work life balance, because if you don't, you're not going to perform well as an editor, as a director, as a camera operator, because if you're tired or you're exhausted, you're not going to function well in your role, sort of thing. So actually having good mental health and good physical health is quite important when you're working in this industry. And I think what they've realized now is that we need to care for people. We need to look after people, because otherwise we might not have people to replace these people.
Absolutely. And I feel like in Scotland there's a real opportunity to really tackle that aspect as well, where you know you can really have a good quality of life here, and in terms of sustainability and sustaining the you know talent over here, that's really crucial to be able to recognize that you can't just work people to the bone and you know spit them out the other way, really. um, and that's a big shift that I'm seeing as well. I think there's still a long way to go, but we're on the right track. Is that how it feels to you?
Yeah, and I also experienced quite a lot of bullying when I was younger, as a junior editor and as an assistant. Back then, I used to have horrible things happen, like being spoke to like you wouldn't speak to people, and had like tapes chucked at me and stuff like that. And it was like, oh, it's part of your initiation. I'm like, you don't need to be like this, sort of thing. But it was quite funny in a way, because years later, what happened, I won't say the name, but I actually met the editor who used to do this to me. And he said, oh, I saw that your film opened the Rain Dance Film Festival. I said, yeah, I'm doing okay now. And I said to him, but do you remember you was the one that used to chuck tapes at me? And he was like, did I? And I was like, yeah, you used to chuck tapes at me. And he goes, oh yeah, but that was part of the industry back then. I said, but yeah, but that's not right, is it? You shouldn't treat people like that, sort of thing. And so my mindset is now that I never, if well, I don't even like a runner on set or anyone. You should treat people how you want to be treated. Don't treat them badly. And it's funny because I've found out over the years, like I've been doing this for over 25 years now, and I've always found that people that shout and bawl, or directors that shout and bawl, are usually not particularly confident or very good at the job themselves, because that's a way of them deflecting the fact that they are not quite good at what they do. So they take it out on other people. And that happened a lot in the post industry when I was younger, sort of thing. But I'm hoping that's gradually changing and it doesn't happen so much, sort of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it feels like and there is a real awareness of how you treat people in general. You're right. Um, if nothing else, etiquette, but also kind of ethos. Working, and again, making this place sort of like the workplace sort of sustainable, because it's not sustainable when you start shouting at people and
No, because people won't want to work there if you start, like, there's been a case now which I'm not going to say happened or not, but in this morning apparently there was issues sort of thing, and I don't know, because there's always two sides of the story sort of thing, but you want to work in a place where you feel like you want to go in every day and you don't want to feel that someone's going to have a go at you or something's going to happen sort of thing. So it's very important that the workplace is a nice place to work, no matter what part of the industry you're in.
So how do you feel about the future of what you're doing, about
I'm pretty positive, actually. I think there's a lot of changes. I actually went to a talk about Lenny Henry today, and he set up a thing with Bristol University to look at issues of diversity, and it was quite interesting because he said that back in his day in the 80s there was like one or two people from black ethnic minority on TV, and thank God that's changed now. Like, you watch news presenters and there's different people now, whereas before, it was totally white middle class people on all the channels sort of thing, and for a long time it's been like that. But finally, what I want to see is that not only do we see people with disability in front of the camera, but also people with disability behind the camera making the programs, because if we don't do that, then we're not going to really change the industry in any way. And what I don't like is these token, oh, we've got one person who's black, or we've got one person with disability. That's not going to change anything. We need to make sure that we're an inclusive employer and that we make sure that we include people. And at the end of the day, it shouldn't really matter if you've got a disability or not. If you're good at a role, if you're good at a camera operator role or good at an editing role, we should be able to provide the right resources and the right sort of ways that we can help people to do their job, basically. So I don't think this excuse of, oh, because they've got a disability, they can't do their job, is true anymore. Like, for me, that was a barrier for me, because a lot of the times people would say, oh, well, you've got this condition, so I don't think you can do the job, sort of thing. And I was like, well, give me something to edit and I'll show you what I can do, sort of thing. So yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I hope that what we're seeing is sort of meeting people as people in the industry, meeting humans where they're at, and being able to include them in the workplace, facilitating his well-being.
The good thing is there's a lot of Facebook groups that are set up now. Like, there's a deaf and disabled Facebook group for TV for the industry, and that puts some really good resources. There's also a neurodiversity Facebook group for people in film and TV. So it's great that now we're actually talking about things, and that we're seeing people from different backgrounds, and that we're experiencing different people work in the film and TV industry. For a long time, that's not been the case. There might have been one or two people with disability on the TV, and that's all you saw. And I feel that unless we represent the whole of Scotland and the whole of UK on screen, we're not really doing a good job as broadcasters in terms of what we're reflecting on screen, because there's all these people with these different stories, and I'm interested to find out how they work, how their lives work, sort of thing. I don't want to see the same shows. Reality is good, but there's only so much reality shows you can do. For me, I prefer a good documentary. I prefer a good drama at the end of the day. That's what I enjoy. But I feel that sometimes it's an easy way out of making reality shows, because they just think people like that stuff. And it's not always the case.
Absolutely. You're just really striking a chord with me right now, because I haven't binge watched a Netflix series in so long, and I just binge watched Virgin River, and the last episode of season 4, which is the last season available right now. One of the characters they've been building to revealing that he had an illness, and on the last episode of the show. And I think they're not releasing season 5 before September. They're revealing that the character has Huntington's disease, which is what my husband has, and I've never ever seen it represented in a and the power of representation. I never expected it, but it really touched me, and it really, and I mean, you know, I get what people are saying about representation in the media. It is huge, having, you know, something that's bigger than you and that connects with all other people around the world, because that's the thing with our industry, is connect with people from all around the world. And that was massive for me.
Well, what used to annoy me in a lot of the ways is I would watch documentaries and drama, and the character would say that they got bipolar or they got some kind of mental health condition, and you could tell they didn't do a lot of research, because the character didn't, for me, it didn't represent me on screen at all, sort of thing. And they hadn't researched it because they assumed that with bipolar that people go from a manic phase to a depressive phase really quick, and that doesn't happen. What happens actually is you've got different states. You've got bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, and you've got a mixed state as well. And with bipolar 2, you experience more depressive episodes than you do manic, and vice versa. With 1, you have more manic episodes than you have depressive. But it's not like every day you change, sort of thing. It's a long process, and it's a long process to get better. And it took me years to get better. And that was a combination of both drugs. That was a combination of eating healthily, doing exercise, all sorts of things. And what sometimes annoys me is that there's documentaries and dramas which are trying to portray certain things, and they don't really hit the mark for me at all, sort of thing. So, yeah.
You're right, but hopefully with, you know, initiatives like yours, and, you know, people get more educated. That's really the, you know, the power also of the film and TV industry, is just to educate. And this is why there's a responsibility. You're right. There's a responsibility to do the research and to get it right, because the programs are usually so far reaching that they need to represent, you know, a story accurately.
I think the soaps are doing better than they used to. So I think they're touching subjects which they never used to touch. So like with Paddy and suicide and all these subjects now, which they kind of didn't ever talk about. And I think it's a good thing they talk about it, because like with a lot of younger people, they can't always talk about their mental health. So having things on soaps and that is a good way of exploring different subjects, which may be quite hard to talk about at school or wherever you are, or even at college, sort of thing. So
absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's amazing, Nigel. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat. And when did you find out about your award? Whether you
November. It's a long wait.
But if you had sleepless nights in the meantime. Well, you know, all the best of luck, and yeah, hopefully speak to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.